Projects go wrong more often than we care to admit. So in this video, I want to give you 5 tips for how to avoid project failure. Tip number 1 is that everything starts with your project definition. Think of a project as a building. Think of the plan as the framework to the building, and the definition as the foundations, the groundwork. If you don't do your definition properly, then there will be no stability, no solidity, no confidence in your project, and your project will be set up to fail. So invest the time in defining your project with precision, in properly understanding the goals, the objectives, the needs, the outcomes of your stakeholders, and setting up the right scope, and making sure that the specifications are right for each of your stakeholders. And this means negotiating and trading off what's important to one stakeholder against what's important to another stakeholder. And this leads to tip number 2. Pay attention to the political dimension to your project, because too few project managers pay enough attention to the needs and the desires and the perceptions of their stakeholders. They put a lot of faith in sound project process and technique and methodology. But of course, it is the perceptions of your stakeholders which will drive assessments of success or failure. If you don't engage your stakeholders properly right from the start and invest the time in communicating well, in listening to their needs, their desires, their preferences, their perceptions, their beliefs about the project, then you are in no condition to properly influence them and to deliver what it is that they need. I often talk about the danger of thinking in terms of stakeholder management rather than the far more respectful approach of stakeholder engagement. You can't manage your stakeholders. You can't get them to do what you want them to do. All you can do is to listen hard, engage with them, and hope to understand their needs. Find out what they know and use that to build a project which will serve them best. Tip number 3 is to manage the complexity of your project. Many project managers learn what is often represented as the communication equation. The fact that the more points of communication there are, then rapidly the faster your project grows in complexity. This is something we understand, but we rarely recognize that the more people, the more components of scope, the larger your project is, the more complex your whole project becomes. And yet, if you were to cut your project into 2 pieces, the overall complexity would drop massively, because you've now got 2 half-size projects, and the points of communication between each part of your project create far less complication and complexity than the points of communication in one bigger project. So where you can, avoid failure by dividing your big, complex and possibly unwieldy project into a number of smaller interacting projects which you could phase as well. Tip number 4 is the vital importance of senior management and leadership support for any project that involves culture change. Quite a long time ago now, John Cotter did some research into change projects and why they fail. And he found that projects that didn't have at least 3/4 of senior leadership conspicuously supporting the project were pretty much doomed to fail. Having 75% or more of your senior leadership supporting the project doesn't mean you're guaranteed to succeed. But what it does mean is you've now got a chance. You're over the first hurdle. So an important first component of any project, and particularly a project that involves change within the organisation, is to ensure that your senior leadership are prepared to lend their support to the project, because if they're not, you've got to ask, what's the point of the project? Now, that's not to say that it is their support that will drive the project and make it successful. It's not to say that they should be designing the outcomes and that you shouldn't be getting involved in more modern approaches like design thinking, where projects can be designed from the bottom up throughout the organisation. But if they're not willing to stand behind your project and endorse what you're doing and the aims and the outcomes you're heading for, then everyone in the organisation will get the message. And people throughout the organisation will say, well, what's the point in me getting involved in this project, in me supporting this project, in me changing my behaviours, if the senior leadership above me aren't prepared to support it and engage with it and change their behaviours? And my fifth tip is something of a hobby horse for me. It's the fact that most organisations that fail to deliver projects don't fail because their project managers are poor, or their project management methodology is weak, or they haven't got commitment or engagement or skilled technical knowledge from their teams. They fail because they try to do too much. Initiative overload is the label we can give to this. Organisations try to do everything that sounds like a good idea. But of course, there is a limitation on the resources that the organisation has, and therefore a limit to how much project work the organisation can swallow at any one time. The problem with this is particularly acute because of the way that human beings work. Because within an organisation, it is rarely the most valuable, the most strategic, the most risky, the most important projects that garner the most support and engagement and resources. It is usually those projects that have a particularly politically astute, pushy, dominant, confident leader behind them. And it's not always the case that those pushy, confident, dominant, assertive leaders are leading the most important projects. And so what we find is the projects that succeed are the ones with charismatic leaders, and sometimes that means that some of the projects that fail are among the most important, most valuable projects to the organisation. This isn't really a role for you as a project manager, but it's something for you to advocate for with your sponsor, with your leadership. And that is to make sure that organisations have a structured mechanism for evaluating a portfolio of projects that is coming forward for approval as a whole portfolio, and looking at the capacity and capability of the organisation when it does it. If the organisation takes on the right number of projects with a carefully chosen strategic balance to the portfolio, it will be far more likely to succeed. And of course, if that organisation has a strong methodology, has capable project managers, and has technically skilled and enthusiastic team members, then its projects are likely to be a success. These tips are just 5 ideas taken from my Kindle exclusive ebook, How to Avoid Project Failure. In it, I cover 60 reasons why projects fail and cluster them within 10 points of project failure. Those form the chapters, and as a trailer for the book, here are the titles of those chapters: the 10 points of project failure. Project definition, governance, planning, politics, stakeholder engagement, resources, project management, testing and quality, implementation, and external factors. There's a link so that you can take a look at the ebook and possibly download it in the notes to this video. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give us a like and subscribe to the channel for more just like it. In fact, why not hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any? And I'll see you in the next video.